Well, we're talking with Damon Silvers, policy director of the AFL-CIO, and I love that you mentioned the NCAA because I think that fits so well into this discussion because, somebody was making fun of my ability to forecast, and they said, who's going to win the NCAA? I said, the coaches. It's rigged. The coaches are, because they make all the money, right? And here's an example of student athletes organizing. They weren't even organizing for money, despite the vast amounts of money they bring into their institutions, and that may come later. They were organizing just to get better protections in their workplace, which is the ball field or the competition, for brain injuries and things. That was their initial issue.
Yep.
And to me, this is a great example of the idea that people who produce something of value, that we need to be broader and more imaginative in our definition of what labor is in the 21st century, and more creative about how to organize. And to me, that's a great, here's an old phrase that you probably remember, if our listeners don't, consciousness raising. That to me is a great example because it's colorful, it's in the public eye, and it's important that these kids are getting together because their coaches and their institutions aren't doing enough to protect them from permanent injury. So to me, this is the labor movement of the future, isn't it? Or a reflection of it, I guess I would say. A reflection of it.
I think, look, Richard, I think what the efforts by the players in the NCAA at Northwestern show, right, is that it's not just people who work in a Walmart warehouse who are having, like, the very nature of their employment kind of defined away from them, right? When the Northwestern thing happened, and I read the legal brief, I said to myself, I just never thought of it this way. I always thought there was a lot of merit to the idea that college athletes and things like Division I NCAA football are not really, that they're employees and they ought to be compensated. I'd always thought that. But what I hadn't realized was that if you think about it for a second, it's not just they need to be employees; they are employees.
Right.
It's just that they are employees now. That most of what they do in the course of their day is in the service of their football team, and that they're being compensated for it with room, board, and tuition. It's just that it's a pittance. It's like Major League Baseball in the days of the reserve clause, right? It's absurd when you actually look at it. But they are employees now. It was like one of those, for me, it was like one of those, one of those double images. We look at one way, you see it one way, look at the other way, you see it two different faces,
Right, the vase and the two old, yeah, right.
Right. These people are employees now, and they asserted it. Like, that was the thing, is that they figured that out and asserted it, and around the issues that mattered for them. Right. And just like in a coal mine, the first issue is, are you going to come out of your work, in one piece? And right. The same thing is true for a college football player as for a coal miner. First question.
And that was that was one of the reasons why I found the topic so engaging, is because I think that corporate America has been extraordinarily imaginative in redefining what it means to be a worker and an employee. So everybody's a free agent, everybody's a contractor, everybody's part-time, everybody's working for a subcontractor or a vendor, like the warehouse people we were talking about with Walmart. All of a sudden, half of Walmart's employees aren't employees anymore, or whoever we're talking about, or they're working for a franchise of McDonald's and that, so while they've been busy thinking up these creative ways to make all of us not their employees, I love that somebody is advancing the ball, so to speak, no pun intended, on advancing the definition of what it means to work for somebody. And that's part of what I was going at. And I guess, just to close off our conversation, we're talking with Damon Silvers of the AFL-CIO, Policy Director and Special Counsel. What's ahead in the future? I'm sure you've read, as I've read, the study that said that 49% of American jobs are going to be automated and or roboticized, and Applebee's is now, you're going to order on your iPad while you're pulling into the parking lot so that they don't have to have servers. And, you know, you hear all, and the taxi drivers are going to lose their jobs, and delivery drivers are going to lose their jobs and all that. So what's in this kind of, but by the way, curious to your thoughts, I think they also use technology to try to excuse unnaturally high unemployment rates. It doesn't have to be that way, but what do you see in this kind of changing environment as the next 20 years of labor growth and challenge?
Well, let me first say that we have high unemployment, right, and we have weak worker bargaining power structurally in our economy, not because of robots, right, or because American workers are sort of fundamentally uneducated or ignorant and aren't ready for the jobs that are there, right? All that is that's all lies, right? We have high unemployment because we have a weak economy and weak demand, and we've got no bargaining power because we've got 30 years of public policy designed to take bargaining power away from workers, and by design to move wealth and income to the top 1% of our society. That's what we've got. And essentially, these stories about technological change, and just to give an example of why this is obviously so, right, is that, for example, if this was an issue of education, we would see a pattern of workers getting income gains who were more educated, and we would see younger people who had college degrees and the like finding work. None of those things are happening. Right?
And we also wouldn't, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we also wouldn't see job creation happening more in the service sector than anywhere else. Both things can't be true, right?
Right. So these stories are stories that are told sometimes by well-meaning people, sometimes not, right, who know that politically, right, corporate power in America is not going to allow the truth to be told here. So a person looks at the situation and says, I once heard President Clinton say this effectively from the podium. He said, well, we can't get agreement on fiscal policy or monetary policy or what the unemployment rate should be, but we can all agree on education, so let's talk about that. And the problem with that is it's well-meaning, but it's not the real problem, and you're going to condemn the country to permanent mass unemployment and permanent soft labor markets and permanent disconnection of wages from productivity and permanent radical inequality if you go into that fantasy world where the problem is robots or training or something like that. Now, that being said, technological change is a fact of the 20th century. In fact, it's a fact of the 19th century. It's been with us for about 150 years on really rapid terms, in some ways it is accelerating. And it's going to mean that there will be some jobs that are being done today by people that in the future will be done by some kind of machine. Now, this is not something new. In fact, there was vast displacement of workers by technology, for example, during the period when the United States had full unemployment and rising real wages, and when wages kept up with productivity in the post-war era. Right? Computers, plastics, jet engines, these things displaced a lot of jobs, but they created new ones. Right? The likely thing that's going to happen here as the process of technological change accelerates is that you will see some jobs go away and new jobs and other jobs come into existence that don't now exist. The issue is, will we have full employment? Will we have labor laws that work? Will we have will workers have real bargaining power? Will we have an international trade regime that encourages rising wages rather than the current one, which encourages falling wages? Those are the real questions, and those are the real questions regardless of technological change.
Right, and I very well said. And as we enter into this era of change, I noticed the president had a commission on that's met a couple times about the impact of technological change on employment. I also noticed that worker representatives were outnumbered by corporate heads by about 10-1 on that commission. So I think part of the challenge going forward is, as we confront the displacing or transformative effect of these new technologies, I want the working men and women of America seated at the table with an equal voice to talk about how we navigate ourselves through this change and create the new jobs that replace the old jobs going forward. Makes sense, right?
Yeah, although I'll tell you, there's only one way to get there's only one way to get to the table, and that is to organize. You'll never be invited in, because they miss you.
Right. No, I guess that's true. And which gets us back to where we started, which is the great work that's happening from the ground up and organizationally in the labor movement to help the Walmart workers and the McDonald's workers and the fast food workers and $15 minimum wage. And you guys are a part of that. So thanks so much, Damon Silvers of the AFL-CIO, for joining us.
You're very welcome, Richard. Take care.
You too. And we'll be right back after this on the Zero Hour.